The gymnasium on the corner of South Figueroa Street in Los Angeles held 412 people on the night of March 7, 1967. The seats had been folded down since 6 in the evening. By 7, every one of them was filled. By 7:15, men were standing 3 rows deep along the back wall, pressed against the painted cinder block, arms folded, watching the warm-up mats with the particular attention of people who understood what they were looking at. The man they had come to see was not Bruce Lee. His name was Ronald Decker. He was 26 years old, 6 feet 4 inches tall, and he weighed 311 pounds at the morning weigh-in. He had been a heavyweight wrestling champion in 2 separate amateur federations. He had trained under a Soviet instructor in Vladivostok for 14 months. He had broken 4 ribs belonging to 3 different sparring partners in the last calendar year alone, not through malice, but through the straightforward application of mass to a body that had not expected to receive it. His reach was 83 inches. His grip strength had been measured at a testing facility in Pasadena at 241 pounds per square inch, a number the technician had written down twice to confirm it. Decker was the kind of man who made trained fighters reassess their arithmetic. He had spent the previous 2 years building a reputation in the private exhibition circuit that moved through the back rooms of gyms and the basements of fight clubs along the Pacific coast. He had not lost, not once, not in an official bout, not in an informal one, not in the car parks that sometimes followed both. The men who had tried to beat him had not succeeded, and most of them had been quiet about the experience afterward, which is its own kind of testimony. In 8 seconds, everything Decker believed about himself would be tested in a way that no weight room and no wrestling mat had prepared him for. Nobody in that gymnasium would ever forget what they were about to see. Not the 412 people in the seats, not the 3 men standing at the scorer's table, not the referee who would be asked about this night in interviews for the next 30 years and would always pause before answering. They were about to watch history. They simply did not know it yet. The chain of events that led Ronald Decker to the South Figueroa Gymnasium had begun with a magazine, not a fight publication. A general interest lifestyle magazine, the kind purchased at airport newsstands, that had run a profile piece on a young martial artist from Hong Kong who had recently begun teaching in the American market. The article had described this martial artist, at length, as the most dangerous unarmed man in California. It had used those exact words, the most dangerous unarmed man in California. Decker had read this in a waiting room. He had set the magazine down on the table with great deliberateness and said nothing for a long time. The men who trained with him described this as one of his recognizable behaviors. The long silence was not uncertainty. It was the engine of a decision turning over. He had sought out the exhibition match through a mutual contact, a promoter named Hal Stearns who operated out of a converted warehouse near Culver City. Stearns had arranged bouts between credentialed fighters on a handshake basis for 11 years. He knew everyone, and everyone trusted him, which in that world was a currency worth more than the event fees. Stearns had made the introduction. The terms were simple: a private exhibition, no press, no formal record, 4 rounds or cessation. A referee from outside both men's circles. Decker had agreed to this immediately. He had then asked Stearns a single question, which Stearns would repeat to people for the rest of his life. He asked whether Bruce Lee had been told who he was fighting. Stearns said yes. Decker said, "Good." The evening had not begun with confrontation. These things never did. There were 4 preliminary bouts on the card that night, 2 of them genuine contests between fighters with real records, 2 of them exhibitions between students of the hosting school. Decker sat in the 3rd row from the front on the right side of the gymnasium, not in the reserved section, not beside Stearns and the other promoters, but in the general seating, in a seat that seemed architecturally inappropriate for a man of his dimensions. He wore dark trousers and a plain gray shirt open at the collar. He was not stretching. He was not shadowboxing his hands on his knees. He was watching the preliminary bouts with the calm of a man reviewing paperwork he had already understood. At 8:47 in the evening, during the pause between the 3rd and 4th preliminary bouts, Decker rose from his seat. He walked to the floor without being introduced. He took the portable microphone from the table at the edge of the mat, which was not his to take, and he turned to face the 412 people in the gymnasium. He was large enough that the size of the room seemed to adjust around him. He said that he had read with great interest the claims being made in the public press about a certain martial artist. He said he had come to Los Angeles from Seattle specifically to address those claims. He said he was 311 pounds of verified wrestling champion, and he wished to invite the most dangerous unarmed man in California to come down to the floor and demonstrate in front of this audience exactly what made him dangerous. He paused. Then he said, "Because from where I am standing, the most dangerous thing about you is the person writing your press releases." He set the microphone down. The gymnasium went absolutely silent, not quiet. Silent, the specific silence of a place where 400 people have simultaneously stopped breathing, is a different kind of silence than ordinary quiet. It has a texture to it. The tournament director, a man named Vince Morales, who had run events in this gymnasium for 7 years, later described the moment as the stillest he had ever experienced in a room with that many people in it. He said his hands had moved to the table on their own, flat against the surface, as though he needed to confirm the table was still there. 3 rows back from the front, on the left side of the gymnasium, a man in a white short-sleeved shirt and dark trousers stood up from his seat. He had been there the entire evening. He had arrived early, alone, and taken a seat in the general section without announcement. He was 5 feet 7 inches tall. He weighed 134 pounds. He was 26 years old. He was wearing street shoes. Nobody around him appeared to recognize him. He looked at Decker across the floor for a long moment. Then he reached down to the seat beside him and picked up a dark jacket. He folded it once along the lapels. He folded it again. He set it on the seat without looking at it. He walked toward the floor. The recognition did not come all at once. It moved through the gymnasium the way a temperature change moves through a room, gradually and then completely. Row by row, from the floor outward, people began to understand who was walking across the mat in street shoes. A sound started somewhere in the middle of the left section. Not a cheer. Not a shout. Something lower and more involuntary, the sound a crowd makes when it suddenly comprehends the scale of what it is witnessing. He did not acknowledge it. He did not look at the crowd. He crossed the mat and stopped in front of Ronald Decker and looked up at the man with the particular quality of attention that people who had trained with Bruce Lee described as the most unsettling thing about him. Not aggression, not performance. A very specific form of calm. The calm of a man who has already solved the problem and is simply waiting for the circumstances to confirm his answer. The referee, whose name was Carl Bauer, stepped between them. Decker looked down at him from 6 feet 4 inches. He has already lost. He simply did not know it yet. Before we reach the 8 seconds that changed what Ronald Decker believed was possible, you need to understand what you are about to see. Because a great many people who watch a man of Decker's dimensions lose a physical confrontation in 8 seconds attribute the outcome to luck, or to a cheap shot, or to the particular unfairness of the world. And all of those people are wrong in the same way. What you are about to watch is not a lucky outcome. What you are about to watch is a negotiation about distance, conducted by one party at a speed the other party did not possess the background to defend against. Every physical confrontation between two people is, at its foundation, a question about proximity. The larger man wants to close distance. The smaller man who understands his position wants to manage distance, not escape it. Not extend it to the point of impracticality, manage it. There is a band of distance between two fighters inside which the larger man's advantages become irrelevant, because he cannot generate the leverage his mass requires. A man of Decker's size needed approximately 2 full steps and a successful grip to begin applying his advantages. The entire outcome of what happened in that gymnasium was decided before either man threw anything, by the question of whether Decker would be permitted to take those 2 steps. He was not. If you want to be here when we break down exactly what happened in those 8 seconds, make sure you are subscribed right now and drop a comment below telling us where in the world you are watching from. This story is one that people in this community need to hear, and we want to know you are with us for it. The referee called the start. Decker did not lunge. This was a detail that every witness commented on separately, without being asked, as though it were the thing that most surprised them. Given his size and his wrestling background, the expected opening was a forward drive, a bull rush, an attempt to establish contact immediately and use the weight advantage before any technique could be applied. Decker did not do this. What Decker did in the first second was take one careful step forward. Controlled, measured, the step of a man who had learned from experience that the first move was bait and that the smart response to bait was patience. He had beaten men who came out fast. He had beaten men who tried to run. He understood tempo. This was the correct analysis for every man he had previously faced. Second 2. The distance between them did not change. Bruce Lee had stepped back by precisely the same margin that Decker had stepped forward. Not a retreat, a calibration. The gap between them remained exactly what it had been. The referee, standing at the edge of the mat, said afterward that the movement had been so smooth and so proportionally matched to Decker's advance that it was almost geometric, like watching a machine maintain a tolerance. Decker's chin dropped slightly. His weight shifted. He was beginning to read the problem. Second 3, Decker's second step came with his right hand extended, a feeler, a measuring tool, an attempt to establish the contact point from which a clinch could begin. In wrestling, establishing a grip was not the end of the movement. It was the beginning of a series of movements. The grip was the door. Decker was reaching for the door. The hand found nothing. Bruce Lee had moved offline, to his left, at an angle that was not a step backward and was not a step sideways in the conventional sense, but was something in between. A diagonal adjustment that placed him outside Decker's extended reach while simultaneously bringing him parallel to the large man's right side. This was not a defensive movement. This was positioning. Decker's forward momentum, which had been the basis of his entire physical strategy, had been redirected from an asset into a liability in the length of one step. 3 witnesses later described the same image. The tournament director, Vince Morales, said that Decker looked in that moment like a man who had reached for a door handle and found the door was not there. A filmmaker named Gerald Okafor, who was present that evening as a guest of the promoter Hal Stearns, said he had reached for his camera out of reflex and then realized there was nothing to photograph yet, because nothing had landed, and yet the outcome of the fight was already visible to him, though he could not have explained why. A judo practitioner named Sam Hayashi, who held a 4th-degree certification and had been watching from the back row, said that as of second 3 he had leaned over to the man beside him and said 4 words. He said, "This is already over." Second 4. Decker turned. This was physically necessary. He had committed his weight forward and offline from his target, and turning was the only mechanical response available to him. It was not a slow turn. He was a trained athlete with extraordinary physical reflexes. He turned with the speed that his body could produce, which by most objective measures was faster than most men in that gymnasium could have managed. It was not fast enough. Second 5. There is a technique in the system that Bruce Lee spent the years between 1964 and 1967 distilling from 12 separate fighting traditions into a single working philosophy. The technique does not have one name in one tradition. It exists across many traditions under different terminology, and in every tradition it is described as a finishing concept, a move reserved for situations of certainty, applied only when the practitioner has obtained a positioning advantage that removes the opponent's capacity to respond. It is not a powerful technique in the sense of requiring the generation of large amounts of force. It requires accuracy, timing, and the kind of spatial intelligence that tells a fighter not what an opponent is doing, but what an opponent's body has already committed to before the opponent's mind has registered the commitment. What landed at second 5 was a single strike. It was not a punch in the conventional sense. It was delivered with the heel of the palm, at an angle slightly upward to a point on Decker's jaw approximately 2 centimeters below his left ear. The force required to produce the effect it produced was, by later estimates from practitioners who analyzed the exchange, a small fraction of what Decker could himself generate in an average strike. The effect it produced was not from the force. It was from the targeting. Decker's head moved. His head moved and the body followed because the body always follows the head. And Decker's 311 pounds of mass, which had been turning and therefore partially off balance, received the angular momentum of that strike at the precise moment when the turning had extended his base beyond its stable range. He did not fall immediately. Second 6. This is the second that witnesses had the most difficulty describing with precision. The difficulty was not with memory, it was with language. Several of them used the phrase suspended, by which they appeared to mean that there was a moment, approximately 1 second in length, during which Decker's body appeared to be in a state of physical negotiation between standing and not standing. His right hand had gone to the mat, his left knee had followed, he was not on the floor, he was not upright. He was in the intermediate position that the body occupies when it has received information from the nervous system that it has not yet fully processed. The referee, Karl Bauer, began moving from the edge of the mat. Second 7. The right knee went down. Second 8. Ronald Decker raised his right hand toward the referee. Not toward Bruce Lee, toward the referee. The distinction mattered. Fighters who raise a hand toward an opponent in a contested situation are sending a message about defiance or negotiation. A fighter who raises a hand toward the referee is sending a message about the fight itself. He is saying that the fight has reached a condition that requires the referee's intervention. He was asking the referee to stop it. Karl Bauer stepped between them. The gymnasium was silent for 1 second. Then the sound came, and it was not the sound of a crowd cheering a knockout. It was something less certain than that, something more complex, the sound 412 people make when they have witnessed a physical fact that contradicts what they believed was possible. Bruce Lee had not moved from the position he had occupied since second 5. He was standing with his arms at his sides, his feet at shoulder width, his breathing unremarkable. He was watching Decker with the same quality of attention he had brought to the beginning of the engagement, not satisfaction, not performance. Attention, the referee was beside Decker now. Decker had one knee on the mat, one hand on the mat, and his head down. He was not unconscious. He was not injured in the catastrophic sense. He was in the condition of a man whose nervous system has received a signal it was not designed to interpret at speed and who is waiting for the signal to resolve. He stayed in that position for 11 seconds. Then he sat back on his heels. Bruce Lee crossed the mat. He stopped in front of Decker and extended his right hand downward. Not theatrically. Not for the audience. He extended it in the straightforward manner of a man offering assistance to another man who needed it, with no supplementary meaning attached. Decker looked at the hand. He took it. Bruce Lee helped him up. And then he leaned forward and he said something to Ronald Decker that no one else in the gymnasium could hear. 412 people were watching two men standing close together on a mat, and not a single one of them heard what was said. The sound of the gymnasium had come back up by then, the murmur of hundreds of people processing what they had seen, and whatever passed between the two men was said under that murmur and remained under it. What happened next was the drama. Because Ronald Decker now stood at the place every man who loses in that manner eventually reaches. The place where the path divides. On one side of the path is the honest accounting of what occurred, the simple acknowledgement that a man who understood something more completely had demonstrated that understanding, and that this was a thing worth learning from. On the other side of the path is the machinery of justification, the search for the external factor, the equipment malfunction, the unusual angle, the thing that would have been different under conditions that no longer existed. Decker stood at that place for a long time. The gymnasium watched him. He turned toward the seats. He found the section where his training partners were sitting, 3 men who had driven down from Seattle with him and who were now very still in their seats. He looked at them for a moment. Then he turned back. He said something. He said it in a voice that was audible in the first 4 rows, and those 4 rows went quiet enough that the rows behind them quieted too, in the way that silence propagates through a space when something important is being said. He said, "I underestimated the problem. Not the man. The problem." The men who heard those words in the first 4 rows reported them to the men behind them, and those men to the men behind them, and by the time the gymnasium began to empty, the sentence had moved through the building like a fact that people needed to carry with them when they left. The story did not stay in that gymnasium. Stories of this particular kind never do. The circuit that Hal Stearns operated was, by design, a closed one, a private network in which what happened in a back room stayed in the back room, in theory. In practice, 412 witnesses is not a number that keeps a secret. It is a number that generates a rumor, which generates a second rumor, which begins to diverge from the original event in specific ways that are themselves worth examining. By the following Monday, the story circulating through the dojo network in Los Angeles held that the fight had lasted 3 seconds. By the end of the week, there was a version in which it had lasted 6, and a separate version in which it had lasted 12, and a third version in which the whole thing had been arranged in advance. The actual duration, 8 seconds as confirmed by Karl Bauer's recollection and corroborated by 3 other witnesses who counted while it was happening, survived in its accurate form primarily among the people who had been in the first 6 rows. Sam Hayashi, the 4th-degree judo practitioner who had said from the back row that it was already over in second 3, spent the following decade teaching at a school in Torrance. He told the story to his students regularly, and he told it accurately, because accuracy was something he cared about professionally. He taught it not as an anecdote about celebrity, but as a lesson about commitment of mass, which was a technical subject he covered in the 3rd month of his intermediate curriculum. He used the specifics of the event, the size differential, the turning move that opened the window, the targeting of the strike, as a worked example of a principle he had been trying to teach with less success using abstract description. He said his students understood the concept better after hearing the story than they had from any textbook. Gerald Okafor, the filmmaker who had reached for his camera and then lowered it, went on to have a career that intersected with Lee's on at least 2 subsequent occasions in professional contexts. He said in a later interview that the thing he thought about most from that March evening in 1967 was not the 8 seconds, it was the 11 seconds of stillness that followed them. He said that 11 seconds of stillness from a man of Decker's physical reputation in front of 400 people contained more information about the event than the 8 seconds of action. He said a man's stillness after a reversal tells you the true depth of what just happened to him. Ronald Decker drove back to Seattle on the morning of March 8, 1967. His 3 training partners rode with him and later reported that he did not discuss the previous evening during the drive. Not once in the 14-hour journey. He looked out the window. He ate at 2 truck stops. He said nothing about the gymnasium on South Figueroa Street. What he did, beginning in the 4th week after the return, was seek out a practitioner of Chinese boxing systems in the Seattle area, a process that took him 3 weeks of inquiry to accomplish, because such practitioners were not abundant in the Pacific Northwest in 1967. He found one. He trained with him 3 times per week for the following 2 years, in addition to his wrestling work. He was not good at it quickly. Size is not an advantage in learning to move with that kind of efficiency. He was the worst student in the room for most of his first year. He continued, "The lesson of the gymnasium on South Figueroa Street was not a lesson about size or about celebrity. It was not a lesson about the hierarchy of fighting systems or about the particular genius of any single practitioner. The lesson was simpler than all of those things and harder to accept and therefore more valuable. The story a man tells himself about what he can do and what is actually available to him in the 8 seconds when someone who knows something more completely shows up to test the claim are 2 different stories. The gap between them is not filled by will or by reputation or by the number of men who have been unable to close it previously. The gap is filled by learning, by the specific willingness to go back to the beginning, to find a room where you are the worst student present, and to remain in that room long enough for the gap to narrow. Ronald Decker remained in that room. The record does not show that he ever became an exceptional practitioner of the systems he spent 2 years studying in Seattle. It shows that he became better than he had been, which was the available outcome, and which was enough. Next week, we will tell the story of what happened on a film set in Hong Kong when a stunt coordinator with a national wrestling title decided that Bruce Lee's on-screen techniques were not physically possible and asked for a private demonstration to confirm his position. We have spoken to 3 people who were on that set. The story lasts 11 seconds, which is 3 seconds longer than the story we told tonight, and in certain respects considerably harder to explain. Be here for it.